Hello there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to make a little scrappy quilt as you go project. One of my favorite things to make with little scraps is a little zip bag, and I love to give those away to people. For the lining of this zip bag, I have this in my stash that I grabbed at a garage sale. I just haven't found anything to do with it yet, but I think it's going to make a great lining for my little zip bag. So I wanted to get my little pieces and parts together. Here you see I've got some 2.5 inch strips that I have folded in half and pressed. I'm going to use those for zipper casings, and I'm going to need a couple of those. And the pieces of casing that I've picked are about 10 inches long. I also grabbed a couple of zippers, not sure which one I'm going to use yet. Then I also have a longer piece of 2.5 inch strip that I've folded kind of into a bias tape format, and I'm going to be using that to cover up some raw edges later. I also cut my batting rectangle, just added a straight edge, and I made this batting about 8 or 9 inches wide. I also cut this fabric that I'm going to use for lining into about 9 inches wide. I laid my lining piece right side down, wrong side up, on my mat, and then I put the batting on top and kind of smoothed it out. And it looked like this length was long enough for me to make 2 little zipper bags, so I cut that long strip in half, and I'm ready to start adding scraps. To start with, I'm taking 2 scrap pieces, and I'm going to lay them down on this batting right sides together. Then I am going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam to hold them together, and then I will open that up and finger press it. Now I'm going to add a 3rd scrap piece, kind of cutting it to a similar shape. I mean, you can play around with this as much as you want, and you can see there's going to be a raw edge right in the middle of my zip bag, but don't worry about that. I'm going to be covering that up later, and I'll show you what I did. You can see here I made use of a big scrap strip left over from a previous project and covered up quite a bit of my little bag at one time. Now here is where I'm using that strip of 2.5 inch fabric that I had folded inward on itself. I've stitched that to one raw edge. Then I'm going to be able to flip that over and cover up another raw edge. And I simply used my pen to draw a line so I know about how far my scraps need to go so that that little white strip will cover them up. And when I had done that, I decided I'm going to go ahead and fold under this scrap strip that I just added. I'm going to draw a line there too and make sure that scrap strip covers up raw edges, and then that white strip also covers up raw edges. And here you can see I'm adding some clips to kind of hold that folded under so that I can see where my raw edges need to go past. Once I had that folded under, I went ahead and stitched down the folded over edge of that scrap strip. I decided to go ahead and stitch the other side of this little scrap strip as well, and then I ended up stitching a couple of more lines on that same strip. Once I had stitched the lines I wanted on this strip, I folded over the white strip and I decided to do the same thing. Once I had that white piece stitched down the way I wanted it, then I simply had to add a nice big strip to the end of what was going to be my bag. I did a little bit of quilting with some straight lines and some triangle lines, and this is how my fabric looks now. My next step to make this little zipper bag is to stitch my casings to the right side of the bag, but I want my raw edges of the casing to be off the edge. And I'm going to do the same thing to the other shorter end of the bag. Next, I flipped the casing around to the inside of the bag and I stitched it down very close to the edge. The next step is going to be to stitch down the zipper to the casing. So I took it to the sewing machine and I top stitched the edge of the casing to the zipper. Not too close, you don't want to get your zipper caught up in your casing. And here's a look at how that looks after the first pass. You can see on the back, on the inside of the bag, it's a little bit loose, and I'm going to flip over to the lining side of the bag, and I'm going to stitch very close to that loose edge to hold it down. Next, I'm folding the bag around so I can get that other casing lined up with the zipper. And I'm going to be unzipping the zipper when I actually go to stitch. So you may want to try some pins or clips, whatever works for you. I found that just putting one clip in at the beginning or the end helped me keep it all lined up. This part can be a little tricky, so use as many pins or as many clips as you feel like you need. With that zipper opened up, I stitched down the casing exactly the same way as I did the other side. Now my next step is to zip my zipper. Make sure the zipper pull is inside your bag. Our next step is going to be to stitch down the sides of our bag with the lining side out. Now I'm going to be stitching mine so that my zipper is about 1.5 inches below the top of the bag. If you want your zipper in a different spot, just make sure and stitch it that way. Now my usual machine's in the shop right now, so I usually do a blanket stitch on these side stitches. I do a straight stitch first, then I go back and do a blanket stitch. Instead of that, since I don't have a blanket stitch here, I just sewed 2 passes with a straight stitch. And before you sew that final outside seam, make sure you have opened up your zipper enough that you'll be able to turn this bag right side out. Next, I trimmed off those side edges, and then I worked on flipping my bag right side out through the openings of the zipper. I have a little wooden tool that I use to poke the corners out without ripping any seams. It's so fun to take scraps and make them into something useful. I just love the way this bag turned out. If you're enjoying my content, I invite you to subscribe and hit that bell icon to get notified when I post new videos. And thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you back again real soon.